Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our webinar tonight. We have Dr. Ross O'Neill with us from Neuromod to discuss Lenire and what that means for you and your patients as well. So we appreciate your attendance. I know your schedules are busy, so thank you. And just really exciting to be working with such an innovative product that Neuromod provides, and the exciting possibilities it's creating for patients with tinnitus. So that's me. I'm one of the owners of Northwest Hearing Tinnitus. I'm going to talk a little bit about our practice before I hand the floor over to Dr. O'Neill. I'm a audiologist. I hold a certificate in tinnitus management through the American Board of Audiology. I'm one of the owners of Northwest Hearing Tinnitus, in addition to Melanie Hecker, who can't be with us tonight. So our practice has been in operation for over 35 years. Our team of experts have been serving the Puget Sound community for quite some time. More specifically, though, in 2017, Dr. Hecker purchased our Seattle practice. And that really was the start of Northwest Hearing Tinnitus. It had been around for quite some time, but that was our first location. After that, in 2021, we acquired our Olympia practice. That made us at 2 locations across Washington State, and I also joined ownership at that time as well. Most recently in 2024, we welcomed Kitsap Audiology into Northwest Hearing Tinnitus, and that made us a 4-location practice. So we added Gig Harbor and Bremerton at that time. So wherever you are in Washington, you can probably find one of our practices for tinnitus care, hearing, and balance as well. There we are across the Puget Sound. So while our footprint has grown, our mission has stayed very, very consistent. It's to help every patient reconnect with the people and moments that matter the most. And our team delivers an experience where patients feel heard, understood, supported, and generally cared for. I think that philosophy becomes especially important when we're working with tinnitus patients. I think they really need space to feel heard and understood before we dive into treatment options for them. So as many of you know, tinnitus can be incredibly complex. It's not just a symptom patients hear. It can affect their sleep, their concentration, emotional well-being, their relationships with others, work performance, and really kind of overall their quality of life. It can become deeply tied with anxiety, stress, frustration, some hopelessness. Many people fear they'll just have to live with it, which I think is told a lot to tinnitus patients long before they really get to us. And so a little bit more about our locations. Each one of our locations has at least one provider who specializes in tinnitus management, as well as a hyperacusis or sound sensitivity specialist on staff. So every provider has advanced training in tinnitus treatment and management, including that ABA certificate holder in tinnitus management that I was speaking about. And some even have additional training in cognitive behavioral therapy support as well. Okay, so this is a little bit about that certificate management in tinnitus that I was speaking of. This certification really represents a voluntary advanced specialization that our providers intentionally pursue in order to provide the highest level of tinnitus evaluation, treatment planning, and patient-centered care. It reflects a commitment to going far beyond standard clinical practice through deeper education in tinnitus mechanisms, counseling, diagnostics, and evidence-based management strategies, which I think is very helpful when we're kind of walking through that treatment management with patients and making sure we're approaching it from all angles. For our referral partners, our goal is to serve as a trusted extension of your care team. So that commitment is reflected not only in our clinical training, but in the way our providers care for patients every day. Our tinnitus specialists are known for their empathy, their patience, attention to detail, and genuine willingness to sit with patients, kind of truly listen and validate what they're experiencing. Because tinnitus can carry a significant emotional and psychological burden, we believe compassionate, engaged listening is just as important as the diagnostic process itself. We hear it kind of day in and day out in our reviews from patients that they finally felt heard and hopeful. I think that space to give them that listening ear gives them a lot of hope for the future, which is very important when we're talking about this patient population. So tinnitus patients typically arrive feeling pretty exhausted, trying to explain their symptoms to people who might not be able to understand what they're going through. And our providers really make space for those conversations. We want patients to feel comfortable sharing not only what they're hearing, but how it's impacting them emotionally and mentally as well. One thing we're known for is the depth of our tinnitus evaluations. We believe thoroughness matters because tinnitus rarely has like a one-size-fits-all cause or solution. So we go through a very, very deep case history with our patients, spend a significant time discussing onset, characteristics of the sound, any possible triggers, stress level, sleep quality, medical history. It kind of goes on and on and on, jaw issues, neck tension, prior hearing tests, kind of where have they been before. We're really kind of diving deep into that case history. The reason we do that is because if there's a potential root cause or contributing factor to uncover, we want to identify it and make sure we're appropriately referring our patients where they need to be. Sometimes that means collaboration with ENT, primary care. A lot of times it means a mental health professional, a dentist, a PT, or other specialists, kind of depending on what's going on. Then we kind of deep dive into some further diagnostic testing. We're going to do traditional audiometry, tympanometry, speech and noise testing, but we do distortion product otoacoustic emissions as well. So we're doing OAEs, we're doing high frequency audiometry all the way out to 20K. And then in the specific tinnitus evaluation, we're doing pitch matching, loudness matching, volume matching, and minimum masking levels to try to give us a good understanding of where that tinnitus is in the auditory system. And then with all that information, it helps us build a complete picture of what's going on. And we kind of take that data and combine it with their experience from their case history and develop a customized treatment plan. We want to make sure it's not a one treatment fits all process. So we're kind of tailoring everything as we go with our patients. And depending on what's going on, treatment plans might include just counseling and education, some on-ear sound therapy, traditional amplification combined with sound therapy, ODA, which is a great cognitive behavioral therapy app-based program. We'll do Lenire. We might do Lenire combined with amplification. And then when appropriate, we'll refer out for additional medical evaluation. So we have quite a few options that we're presenting to patients based on their scenario. And one of the things we really appreciate about Lenire is that it gives us another evidence-based option to add to that toolbox. It allows us to help patients who may not have experienced meaningful improvement through other kind of older traditional approaches alone. And really, patients are coming to us specifically requesting Lenire. You know, they've had a friend that have had a great success with it, or they read about it online and they really like the research coming out from it. So that's one of the reasons we're so excited to host tonight's webinar. We want you to feel informed and comfortable having those initial conversations with patients. Even something as simple as planting the seed of hope, excuse me, can make a huge impact for somebody who's struggling with tinnitus. Sorry, I'm going to grab a drink of water. So sometimes patients just need to hear that there are options available. And with that, I'm going to give it away to Dr. O'Neill.
Thanks, Kendra. Just share my screen. Make sure everybody can see it. You see that? Yeah.
Yes,
okay, thanks.
Great.
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Ross O'Neill. I am the founder and CEO of Neuromod, who are the inventors of the Lenire bimodal neuromodulation device for tinnitus. A little bit of background about myself. I'm a biomedical engineer by training, and actually had intended to work in the pain field, was looking at developing similar treatments for phantom limb pain. But around about that time, my eldest daughter was diagnosed with profound deafness. And so I became interested in active implantable devices, cochlear implants and the like, and became very kind of aware of the hearing healthcare space. Now, every time I spoke to ENTs and audiologists about, you know, what were the biggest challenges that they faced, everybody kept talking to me about tinnitus. They said, if you want to make real impact in this space, you know, what was badly needed was a treatment for tinnitus. Now, I started to look into tinnitus. I started to ask friends and family, colleagues, and what struck me was how many people, even in my own network, had the condition that I didn't know about. And it turns out that about 15% of the adult population suffer from tinnitus. Now, we concentrate on the 6% of patients that have moderate, severe, or catastrophic tinnitus for a number of reasons. One, they are the majority of treatment seekers. They constitute anywhere between 80 and 90% of treatment seekers. And also, they are the patients who are most impacted and have the most capacity for improvement, and are also turns out to be the most suitable patients or the best candidates for our technology. So when I looked at what was available at the standards of care at the time, it seemed that tinnitus was essentially a kind of a pyramid or a triangle of three problems and it started with generally with hearing loss, either, you know, early stage kind of synaptopathy or a measurable hearing loss. And then when you speak to patients, they all have the same story. They say that they became aware of this sound and they asked a partner, a wife or husband or friend or family member if they could hear the sound that they were experiencing. And when their wives or husbands said, no, I don't hear anything, you know, what always happens is these patients become frightened. They go, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm hearing a sound in my head. And it turns out that they then start looking for the sound, you know, and become more aware of it and more frightened by it. And that combination of limbic response, that fight or flight response and attention, they feed each other, and they're a lethal combination. And that's how the tinnitus percept becomes habituated in the brain. Now, the treatments available at the time included, you know, hearing aids and sound therapy, and then cognitive therapy and other counseling approaches. So the hearing aids and sound therapies were aimed at the auditory side of the condition. So they hoped to, you know, mask or drown out the tinnitus percept in the hope that patients would no longer hear it or would habituate it. Now, the primary complaint that I always heard from tinnitus patients about hearing aids or sound therapy were that it was great while they were using it, it masked the tinnitus, but as soon as they took off the hearing aids at night, their tinnitus would spike and they wouldn't be able to get to sleep. So it didn't provide any lasting relief. Equally, patients talked about CBT, and they said, look, it's great, but it takes a long time, it's hard work. And a lot of patients seem to drop out after a certain level of or certain time in treatment. Now, it struck me that nobody had ever developed a treatment that targeted the attentional component of tinnitus. And what happens with tinnitus is your brain is giving way too much attention to this one sound, this internal sound. And there is an approach whereby we can direct attention and we can change how neurons behave, called paired associative stimulation. It dates right back to Pavlov and his dogs. And over time, neuroscientists have used this to change the characteristic frequency of neurons in the auditory system by pairing sound with a reinforcing tactile signal. So we started to explore that to see if we could use that to potentially dilute the amount of attention that the brain was giving to tinnitus and make it pay more attention to all the non-tinnitus sounds that span the human spectrum. So that's where we came up with the concept of bimodal neuromodulation. We built an intraoral electrode array that goes in the mouth like a lollipop, and it's in contact with the tongue, and it delivers transmucosal stimulation. And we developed almost like a little mini cochlear implant where each electrode corresponds to a different frequency tone. So the device plays tones through Bluetooth headphones, and at the same time, the patient hears or feels a corresponding electrode activation that corresponds with those tones. And what the idea is that the device will, over time, will take attention away from that tinnitus sound and make it pay more attention to the non-tinnitus sounds. So the patient uses the device in the comfort and privacy of their own home. They use it for 2 30-minute sessions per day. And essentially what they hear and feel the music at the same time. Now, when we talked to both doctors and patients at that time about tinnitus, we could see that there was a lot of skepticism, that there had been a lot of treatments marketed that maybe didn't have sufficient scientific backing or rigorous clinical research behind them. And so we decided that if we were going to develop this technology, that we would embark on a strategy of credibility building, that we would work with all the top scientists in the space. We'd do the largest clinical trials conducted in the space. We'd publish them in top tier peer-reviewed journals. We'd go for the most difficult FDA regulatory approvals. And that then once we launched the product, we would continue to track the real world evidence or real world data and also submit that for peer review and publication. So that's essentially what we've been doing. At this point, the technology has been evaluated in multiple clinical trials with over 700 patients. 3 of those trials were large-scale clinical trials, TENTE-1, TENTE-2, and TENTE-3. TENTE-1 and 2 were parameter optimization and patient subtyping studies. This is when we looked at different stimulation parameters to see what was driving the effect, and also then examined different patient subtypes to see if any tinnitus subtypes were differentially responsive to different types of stimuli. Both of these studies then culminated in the TENTE-3 trial, which was the trial that we designed in collaboration with the FDA for our FDA approval. They've been published in top-tier peer-reviewed journals, Science and Nature. 2 of the trials became cover stories, and our FDA trial is in the 99th percentile most viewed paper in the history of the journal in which it was published. Essentially, what these trials showed was that Lenire or bimodal neuromodulation delivers much better results much faster than the current standards of care. So we took this data to the FDA And because there had never been a bimodal neuromodulation device before, the FDA said we had to go through the de novo pathway. So this required a clinical trial designed to give them comfort around safety, efficacy, and placebo control. So in one of our earlier studies, we had used a single arm repeated measure design where patients acted as their own control, where we gave patients sound therapy for 6 weeks and then followed it up with bimodal neuromodulation for a second 6 weeks. What we showed in that single arm repeated measure study was that patients, when they got sound only, showed a certain rate of improvement and a certain responder percentage rate, and that when we introduced bimodal in the second half of the 12-week trial, that the rate of improvement increased, and also the number of responders also increased. So the FDA liked that design. They had seen it used before in cochlear implant trials where they were paired with other devices like hearing aids, etc. And essentially the question that they wanted to answer was if when you combine essentially sound therapy with a bimodal stimulation, when you introduce the tongue tip, do you see an additional and synergistic effect over and above just a doubling of the sound therapy effect alone? So they told us to design or to conduct a trial across multiple clinical sites. We did this in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which was quite challenging. But we conducted the trial. We completed it start to finish within 9 months across 3 clinical sites in Europe, in Ireland, Belgium, and Germany. And it was the design single arm repeated measures where bimodal had to outperform sound therapy. So the trial was successful, and we proved that the second half of the trial, patients responded in a higher percentage than in the first 6 weeks of the trial. We also showed that the device was inherently safe. There were 0 adverse events and 0 withdrawals due to adverse events. So the FDA gave the device a very low risk profile. Equally, we saw that patients responded in higher percentage in the second half of the trial. So those two combined meant that we had the de novo classification is essentially a risk benefit to risk ratio consideration. So the FDA were comfortable that the benefits outweighed the risks of the therapy, and so granted us FDA approval in 2023. So following on from that, we continued to collect real world data. So we initially launched the product in the US with 14 clinics, and we started collecting data from each of those clinics. One of our clinics in New York, we have just published the data from that clinic, and what we've seen is that the real world results mirror what we saw in the clinical trials. In fact, that some of the results are marginally better than what we saw in the clinical trials, and we put that down to what we call the 3 Ps. So it's when you take an effective product like Lenire, but then you put it in the hands of expert providers who follow well-defined clinical processes, then you get these exceptional results. We also saw similar results in our clinic in Boston. Again, very high responder rates, over 80%, and mean improvements that were 4 times the minimal clinical important difference. Following on from that, some of our first clinics, one of our first clinics in Alaska is now have seen patients that are about 12 or 24 months post treatment, and we have seen from that data that the benefits retained or that were enjoyed in the first 12 weeks of treatment are sustained 12 and 24 months out post treatment. We then started to look at the same data across a number of other sites, and when we combine 3 of the sites that now have 24 months data, we see that picture is consistent. So the patients respond in high numbers, and then the improvements that they get are multiples of the clinically important difference, and that those effects are sustained out 24 months post treatment. And when we compared that data to a recent study that was conducted in Europe, the Unity study, which was sponsored by some of the hearing industry manufacturers, which looked at all combined treatments. So it included hearing aids with structured counseling, sound therapy, CBT with hearing aids, CBT with sound therapy. We see that our real world data, which is Lenire combined with structured counseling, outperforms all other combinations of treatments that included in the standard of care. We are now conducting a study following on from that real world evidence that I presented earlier. We are starting to collect data from multiple sites across the US in a study that we're calling Access, and that now has over 2,000 patients in it. And the results are highly consistent across all clinics across the United States. So we hope to publish that later this year. So that's it. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take any questions.